Good morning. Happy Easter. He is risen. Amen. So this morning we're going to backtrack a little bit to Friday, and we'll be reading from Matthew 27, beginning in verse 45. And we'll read through the resurrection in chapter 28. So we're in Matthew 27. Matthew 27, verse 45. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, this man is calling Elijah. And one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, truly, this was the Son of God. There were also many women there looking on from a distance who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there sitting opposite the tomb. The next day, that is, the day after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, Sir, remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, after 3 days I will rise. Therefore, order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people, he is risen from the dead, and the last fraud will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, you have a guard of soldiers. Go, make it as secure as you can. So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. Chapter 28. Now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He's not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I have told you. So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, greetings. And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. Verse 11. While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, tell the people, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. Father, as we celebrate this morning, I pray that you would, by your Spirit, speak truth to our hearts. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. So it's early, that first Easter morning when our story begins. Still dark outside as Mary Magdalene rises from her bed, her mind still reeling from the events of the past few days. She wraps her cloak around her and walks out into the cold morning air to meet her close friends. The other Gospels tell us it was more than just Mary and Mary. There were others there. There was Mary Magdalene. There was Mary, the mother of James. There was Salome, the mother of James and John. There was Joanna, the wife of Chuza, and probably Susanna was there as well. They've all agreed this Sunday morning to go and anoint the dead body of their sweet Jesus, who had been brutally executed on Friday and laid in a borrowed tomb near the executioner's hill. They've served him gladly these past many months, and now they want to show him one last act of kindness in spite of their broken hearts and their deep, deep despair. They had hoped that he would be Messiah, that he would usher in the kingdom of God on earth, that he would restore Israel to her former glory, that he would cause righteousness to reign in the place of the evil that shrouded the world. Instead, before their very eyes, the evil had overcome him, brutally torturing him to death, piercing their own hearts with a pain they had never known possible. Such a kind man, such a good man, so gentle, so firm, so loving, so wise. Who could hate him so much? And how could that hatred be stronger than his love? And worst of all, how could God Almighty allow such horrible things to happen to one so holy and good? They don't say much as they walk huddled together, huddled against the cold, against the fear, against the evil that still hangs in the air. As they come to the top of a rise in the path, they stop. There, off in the distance, stand the testimony of what took place on Friday. Silhouetted against the gathering dawn stands 3 crosses. Empty. Hateful. Empty. Now there's a word for you. Empty, barren, vacant, pointless. Pointless. This morning I want you just for a second to step into the sandals of the disciples that morning. Consider what had taken place this Passover. Jesus died. How could that be? Seriously, imagine what transpired the last 3 years for these disciples and everything that they witnessed. And think about it just for a second. They saw water turn to wine. They saw Peter's mother-in-law healed on the spot. In fact, they saw Jesus heal hundreds, if not thousands, of people these past 3 years. He raised the dead more than once. He calmed the sea more than once. He cast out demons multiple times. He stood up to the Pharisees and the priests and taught with more authority and power and wisdom than anyone ever had, all the while living an absolutely morally perfect life. He claimed to be Messiah, and he backed it up by doing everything that he ever said he would do. There was only left one thing to do: vanquish Rome and make Israel great again. The prophet Daniel had said that Messiah would come and have dominion and glory, that he'd be king over all the earth, that all peoples, nations, and languages would serve him, and his dominion would be an everlasting dominion which would never pass away and would never be destroyed. The disciples had every reason to expect that Jesus was the Messiah and that he would make Israel great again, just like it was once under David's kingship. And without a doubt, they were also expecting that he would make them rich and famous and powerful, right? And then there he was on a cross, dead. Can you imagine the crushing loss of these people as they watched this take place? This isn't just the loss of a friend or a leader. This is the unimaginable loss of a dream. Everything was gone in a flash. Just 24 hours before the crucifixion, these guys were arguing about who was going to be greatest in Jesus' kingdom. They were jockeying for positions of power in Jesus' government. And then they hear those dreadful words out of the darkness that Friday afternoon as the sun refused to shine. Those words, "It is finished." And you know what those words meant to the disciples. It is finished. It's over. It's done. He failed. Evil wins again. All hope is lost. Can you feel their despair? Utter hopelessness? And an aching fear that they're going to be next, that the authorities are coming for them? But the worst of all of it, I think, was just the empty promises. Jesus had promised to bring a new kingdom, a kingdom of peace and glory. He said, "My kingdom will have no end," remember? And he even promised that those 12, that they would sit on 12 thrones that would judge the tribes, and that they would receive 100-fold as much as everything that they had ever left for him, houses, family, fields, 100-fold. They had an expectation of being rich. He gave them that expectation. And he promised, "I will never leave you or forsake you." And yet there he was, dead and cold on that late afternoon of despair. All was lost. Or was it? You know, the world is full of empty promises. People promise us things all the time that they cannot deliver on. TV ads tell you, you'll be classy, captivating, popular, happy, satisfied if you'll just buy our doodad. If you just have this widget, now you'll be happy. This will seal the deal for you. And it doesn't take long for us before we've been burned enough that we realize that the world's promises are full of emptiness. But not God's. God never lies. The God who said that he would work all things together for the good of those who loved him, he doesn't lie. On Easter, this morning, as we sang those songs this morning, my heart filled up with joy because instead of promises full of emptiness, God gives us emptiness that's full of promise. So specifically this morning, I want to look at two empty things. I want to look at the empty cross and the empty tomb and the promise that those two bring to us. No, Easter's empty promises are not like the world's empty promises. Now, Easter's empty promises carry the greatest hope that the human heart can know. But I have to say that as that group of women huddled together closely in the cold dawn on that hill, their hearts were empty as they gazed at the bloody, empty cross on that hill over there. See, what they couldn't see through their grief and pain was the promise. That barren cross stands as a memorial to death, not just to those women, but to us. And that's a very important death. It is a death that has to have happened for any of us to be saved. Those faithful followers had no way of knowing just how important that memorial of death would be throughout the annals of time, and how many people would actually claim that, well, Jesus never actually died on that cross. I think that's why God dedicates so much time in all four Gospels to Jesus' last day, to his death and his burial, just to provide evidence of his physical death. When you read the details of the Gospels, it's pretty far-fetched to imagine that a man could survive the ordeal that Jesus submitted himself to that day. Don't forget that crucifixion is what the Romans did with criminals. The soldiers that crucified Jesus that day, they knew what they were doing, because they did it all the time. They were very good at it. A man carrying a Roman cross in the time of Christ quite literally was a dead man walking. There was no escape. There's no faking the effects. There's no faking fainting, playing dead, so that the Romans would leave you alone. No, when the Roman guard set out to execute a man on a cross, they made certain that their goal was achieved. With Jesus, just to be sure, they shoved a spear up under his rib cage, probably through his diaphragm. out of which flowed water and blood. No, when the Roman guards went home that night, they knew Jesus was dead. And it bears mentioning that the Jewish leaders also wanted Jesus dead. They handed him over to Pontius Pilate, and they cried out for him to be crucified. The one thing that they had in mind that day was to see Jesus dead. I can guarantee you that those guys did not leave Golgotha until they were absolutely certain that Jesus was dead on the cross. Well, in the same way, that small band of believers that showed up that day who followed Jesus up at a distance, albeit onto that hill, stood by and watched him die. There was no question in their minds that Jesus was dead. They were the ones who took down his mangled, lifeless, cold body and held it in the darkness at the foot of the cross. No, when they left the hill that day, they too knew that Jesus was dead, and it was hopeless. You know, strange that all of those who were there that day, whether friend or foe, knew Jesus was dead. It takes foolish men 2,000 years later to make up a story that he didn't actually die. But just in case there might be some doubt in your mind, I do want to take a quick look at the science of the crucifixion this morning, just in case it's been a while since you've been over these facts. We know for a fact from the gospel accounts that Jesus' ordeal began Thursday night in the Garden of Gethsemane. We're told that he was under tremendous stress and strain. Even before he was arrested, he told his disciples, and he doesn't lie and he doesn't exaggerate, he said that he was troubled and overwhelmed to the point of death. And then he prayed to the Father, and he asked the Father if there was any way to let this cup, the cup of God's wrath, to pass from him. And then he prayed, no, not my will, your will be done. And Luke tells us that as he was there in anguish in that garden, that he was sweating like great drops of blood. Now, maybe that meant that Jesus was just sweating profusely, losing lots of water because of the anguish that was upon him. Maybe that's what that means. But it was a cold night. We're told that he had his cloak with him, as did the other disciples. It was cool that night, and he's sweating profusely. Maybe actually he was sweating drops of blood. It's a medical condition called hematidrosis, or some of the literature calls it hematihydrosis. It's not very common, but it is associated with a high degree of psychological stress. One doctor says what happens is severe anxiety causes the release of chemicals that break down the capillaries in the sweat glands. As a result, there's a small amount of bleeding in these glands, and the sweat comes out tinged with blood. Now, it really doesn't matter much which one of those is. We know that the dehydration of Jesus' body has already started on Thursday evening. Scripture also tells us that Pilate delivered Jesus over to be flogged, to be scourged before the crucifixion. I found the testimony of a Dr. Alexander Metherell. He's a medical doctor, and he also holds a doctorate in engineering from the University of Bristol in England, and he has researched the accounts of crucifixion among the ancient Romans. Crucifixion started 9 centuries before with the Assyrians, and it trickled down till the Romans perfected the art, and this doctor has researched that. He says this, quote, Roman floggings were known to be terribly brutal. The Jewish guards would have been restricted by the Old Testament to 39 lashes. Not so with the Romans. Victims of Roman floggings often did not survive. The soldier would use a whip of braided leather thongs with metal and pieces of sharp bone tied at the end, which when used would cut the flesh severely. The back would be so shredded that part of the spine was sometimes exposed by the deep cuts. The whipping would have gone all the way down from the shoulders, down the back, the buttocks, to the back of the legs. It was horrific. As the flogging continued, the lacerations would tear into the underlying skeletal muscles and produce quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh. The 3rd century historian Eusebius described Roman flogging by saying, quote, the sufferer's veins were laid bare, and the very muscles, sinews, and bowels of the victim were often open to exposure. Now, I don't read that to you to gross you out this morning or to even glorify the gore, but if foolish people are willing to say that Jesus survived that, then I think we need to be clear about what actually took place on that Friday. We're told in Isaiah 52 that Jesus' flogging was severe. Isaiah 52:14, speaking about Messiah, says, "Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness." Psalm 22 that Jack read this morning says that his bones were out of joint and were exposed. Now, of course, by this time, Jesus was in tremendous pain and quite possibly suffering from hypovolemic shock. That's a loss of blood, loss of body fluids. It's a condition in which the blood and the fluid loss make the heart unable to pump enough blood to the body. The heart races because the brain's telling it that the tissues need oxygen, but the heart's unable to pump blood that's not there, or the blood that is thick, like syrup, because it's dehydrated. And so the blood pressure drops dangerously low. Without a doubt, Jesus was already in critical condition before the crucifixion. And then he was subjected to 2-inch thorns in his scalp, more beatings at the hands of the Roman guards. And it was in that condition that Jesus was forced to carry his crossbeam of his cross up the hill that day. And if you're wondering what a crossbeam was like, I'm told its dimensions are very similar to a railroad tie of rough-hewn lumber, just like that. And once on top of that hill, Jesus would have been laid down on that cross and nailed to it. And we know from archaeology, from the first century, that the Romans nailed their victims through the wrists, which in the Roman world was still part of the hand, and through the ankles with 7-inch spikes. Lee Strobel writes, "The pain was absolutely unbearable. In fact, it was literally beyond words. They had to invent a new word, excruciating. Literally, excruciating means out of the cross. Think of that. They needed to create a new word because there was nothing in the language that could describe the intense anguish caused by a crucifixion. And the person hanging on the cross was hanging by the nerves in his wrists and would find it almost impossible to believe because of that pain. And so the Romans gleefully added a little wooden block underneath the feet that they would nail under the feet so the legs would be slightly bent, and then the feet nailed down to that block so that the victim would be able to use their legs to push themselves up to relieve the pain on the nerves in their wrists in order to get a breath, creating unexplainable pain through the spike in the foot, which couldn't be borne for very long, so they would go back to hanging on the nerves in their wrist and not being able to breathe. And that horrible cycle would be repeated with every single breath, remembering, of course, that Jesus' back was beaten raw and that every cycle caused him to push up with his raw back against that rough tree. And that's the point of death. When a person could no longer do that and was exhausted and could no longer get a breath, they died. Usually because of the sustained rapid heartbeat, they would have built up within their chest cavity fluids around the lungs and fluid around the heart. Pleural effusion and pericardial effusion, respectively. There's no mistake about what Jesus experienced. We're told that when the Roman soldier thrust that spear into Jesus' side, it probably went under his ribs, into his diaphragm, and water and blood came out. Jesus was dead. It's irrefutable. Now, even the Jewish leaders knew this, right? Later, when they heard that Jesus was no longer in the tomb, they didn't claim that Jesus didn't die. That would be ridiculous. This was a Roman crucifixion. Of course he died. Instead, they made up a lie that the disciples stole the body, because to say that Jesus didn't die would be absurd. Of course the man died. That's why I want us to see the empty cross this morning. He died. The fact that he died, the fact that that cross is empty, fills us with promise, because he died for you. And if Jesus didn't die on that cross, then you and I are still in our sins. It was that death that paid for our sins. 1 Peter 2:24 says, he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. You were spiritually dead, now you're spiritually alive, if you're in Christ. In the garden, Jesus asked the Father to remove the cup from him, the cup of God's furious wrath against sin. And then he bowed himself to the Father's will, saying, not my will, but your will be done. And now, on that hill far away, that cross stands empty because Jesus did drink that cup all the way to the dregs, as Isaiah 51 says. And when he drank it all, that means he had taken it all. He said, Tetelestai, it is finished, it is accomplished. And that's when he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. For you, for me. God says the wages of sin is death. He says the soul that sins shall surely die. Jesus never sinned. Everyone could see that. Even the man on the cross next to him said, this man has done nothing wrong. He could see Jesus' innocence. And yet Jesus died for sin. Why? Because it's your sin. It's my sin on him. Romans says God demonstrates his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Doesn't make any sense, does it? That the perfect one, the holy one, would die for wanton sinners like us? Does that make any sense? I mean, even the earth shuddered at the idea that afternoon when he bowed his head. The earth shook and the sun stopped shining. And the curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom. And everyone present that day knew they had made a mistake, that in their ignorance they had killed the author of life. And Jesus says this morning, I paid the price, the full price for your soul. Will you come to me? The full price. You know, the people that day who were present at the crucifixion, they kept thinking, especially the disciples, at some point here, he's going to put an end to all this and he's going to come down from the cross and he's going to vanquish his enemies, right? He's going to show us how small these little Jewish leaders are and he's going to show how weak the Roman Empire is, right? They wanted to see some outward working of his great raw power. I'm of the conviction that Jesus actually exercised even greater power than that day. The real power that Jesus exercised that day was that having the power to come off of the cross, having the power to vanquish Rome and to humiliate the Jewish leaders, he hung in there. The greatest power was his restraint because he wanted you. He did this for you. He was paying the full price for you and me. And now he asks, I did it for you. Will you come to me? Will you trust me? What love? You know, some people question why God would send anyone to hell. And they even get a little angry at God, maybe sometimes very angry at God, for this idea that God sends people to hell and he's not going to forgive everyone. You know, I'm actually much more surprised that God forgives anyone. We don't deserve it. Frankly, I'm surprised that he forgives me, a sinner, a wanton sinner, a mocker. Now, I don't mock Jesus with my words anymore. I did once before I knew him. But I still mock him with my actions. Every time that I choose to willfully sin in the face of his grace, I'm mocking Jesus. I'm mocking the cross where he paid the price for that very sin. How quickly we forget our condition, how we really are. If we really had a grasp on the human condition, the words, God loves you, would stun us. God loves me? Doesn't he know who I am? Well, the answer is yes, he knows us. And he knows our condition. And that's why he died for us and he bids us to come. And so there stands our women, that small group of women on that hill, as they pause and look once again at the cruel cross. But morning's coming, and they've got a lot of work to do. They have aloes and they have spices for Jesus' body. There's a sense of foreboding, though, as they make their way down the path. I mean, that body was a bloody mess. And now on the third day, it's going to be swelling and stinking. But they go anyway because of their love for Jesus. And as they go, one of them wonders out loud, who's going to move the stone for us? Now, they have good reason to be concerned about that. That stone placed in front of that tomb was likely a large boulder, maybe as many as 2 tons. Not only that, the Romans had sealed it. No one was allowed to move that without their permission. But they go anyway because of their love for him. And then all of a sudden they feel the earth moving underneath their feet. And frightened, they look at each other. What should we do? Another earthquake, just like Friday. But they have no better plans, so they continue on their way. And as they enter the garden, they stop dead in their tracks because there before them, all the soldiers are on the ground unconscious. The stone has been moved away, and there's an angel glowing like lightning sitting on top of the stone. And I think probably with a playful grin on his face. We're told he's sitting there. I'm thinking he's leaning back with his legs crossed, just beaming. And he says this, "Don't be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who's been crucified. He's not here. He's risen." Then he bids them, "Come, see the place where he lay, then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead." Amen? The tomb's empty, but full of promise. Death has been conquered. In fact, the empty tomb is the truth of the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the promise for every single person in this room, every person all over the world, every person who has ever lived, that we too can be raised again to new life if we will simply trust the Savior. For those who know Jesus as their Savior, death has lost its sting. It's no longer something to be feared. What fear is there when we have the promise that one day we will live with Jesus in paradise in new bodies, just like the body he got that Sunday? Death has lost its sting. What does that mean? Heard the story of a man who was driving down the road one day with his son. It was spring, they had the windows down, and a bee flew in the car, which normally isn't a big deal, except the son was deathly allergic to bee stings, and he began to panic. And Dad's trying to help and get the bee out. And, of course, now the car's swerving a little bit. So finally, Dad just reaches over and he grabs the bee in his hand. And his son calms down a little bit. And he's looking at Dad with wide eyes. And then Dad opens up his hand and the bee flies off. And now the bee's flying around in the car again. And the son's panicking again. And Dad says, "No, son, relax. I took the sting. He can't hurt you. See, it's right there." The empty tomb is God's way of saying to us, "Relax, my child. I took the sting. Death can't hurt you." Now, I know that there are people who say, Jesus didn't rise from the dead. The disciples actually did steal the body. And then they spread a lie about his resurrection. And they like to say that if you are willing to believe in Jesus, that he rose from the dead, you are very naive and maybe even kind of stupid. And then if you're believing that, you're just doing so by blind faith. There is no evidence. It's all just wishful thinking. Well, that's what they say. So I want to take a minute, again, just to look and see. Now, I actually believe that God is against blind faith. God gives us lots of evidence. He is clearly perceived in the things that he has made. He speaks to the heart of man. He wrote on our hearts, on our conscience, his law. But there are enough people out there that are willing to say this. I think it's worth the time to look at evidence in relation to the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. So I just want to start with the facts. So let's begin looking at a few historical facts that all serious historians agree on. All right? I mean serious historian. Doesn't matter whether they're atheists, whether they're Christian, whether they're agnostic, whether they're Buddhist, whatever. It doesn't matter. All serious historians agree with this. These 5 facts. 1, a man named Jesus of Nazareth was crucified on a Roman cross in or around 33 AD. 2, the tomb that Jesus was placed in was empty on Sunday morning. 3, many people, believers and skeptics, admitted to experiencing what they called a resurrected Jesus. 4, those people who experienced that are the ones who started the church, a church that now has survived 2,000 years. And 5, those people, those eyewitnesses that spread the church in those early years did so at the cost of their own blood. Now, those 5 facts are irrefutable. But just because historians all agree on the facts doesn't mean that they agree on the explanation of the facts, not by a long shot. Just because there's an empty tomb doesn't mean that they all agree that Jesus rose from the dead. So I want to take a minute here and look at the evidence. I'm going to give you some facts. These facts are the evidence. And what do reasonable people do with evidence? Just weigh the data and then come to a conclusion. That's what we do with evidence. Come to the conclusion that best fits the evidence. What does the data tell us is most reasonable? So, number 1, let's go back to that idea that Jesus didn't actually die. It only seemed as though he died. I'm not going to spend long on this because we already discussed it. The forensics of the case are irrefutable. I mean, the notion that Jesus could have survived is ridiculous, but, I mean, what would have had to happen? In order for Jesus to survive, he would have had to survive the beatings, the scourging, the blood loss, the thorns, the nails, hanging on the cross for 6 hours, severe dehydration, being speared under the ribs, through the diaphragm, declared dead by Roman soldiers who knew dead because they did it all the time, was embalmed with 75 pounds of spices and laid on a cold stone slab in a pitch-dark crypt. And then 3 days later was feeling much better, got up, rolled the stone away, overpowered a Roman guard, and went into town to show himself to everybody. Now, if you, as an intelligent, educated person, have decided for yourself that that's the best conclusion to come to, that best fits the evidence, I don't know what to say to you. I think maybe you have more wishful thinking than I do. Second theory, another popular theory for the empty tomb is the hallucination theory. Educated man by the name of Dr. Richard Carrier has a PhD in ancient history from Columbia University, writes, quote, "I believe the best explanation consistent with both scientific findings and the surviving evidence for the empty tomb is that the first Christians experienced hallucinations of the risen Christ of one form or another." In other words, the disciples didn't actually see Jesus that morning. They just had hallucinations of Jesus. And we're not just talking about the 11 disciples, we're talking about 70 disciples and the other 500 eyewitnesses that saw him over the next several days. They must have all been hallucinating. But here's the thing. Hallucinations are all in your head. They don't get out. Psychologists call hallucinations first-person private events. It's a first-person private experience. If I see a hallucination of a man walking down the aisle here, I can't ask you to tell me what color shirt he has on because he's not out there. He's in here, and he's not getting out. So for the hallucination theory to be viable, it means that all of these people, more than 500, had to have the same first-person private experience at the same time, multiple times, and even in the minds of complete doubters, like Thomas and James, Jesus' own brother. Do you believe that? It's pretty far-fetched, but it still doesn't answer the question, where was the body? Right? If all these people were just having hallucinations, that's easily solvable. All you have to do is have the authorities, whether the Roman authorities or the Jewish authorities or all of them together, grab all these disciples and all these people running around hallucinating and take them out to the graveyard, open up the real tomb and say, there's your Jesus. He's swollen and he's stinking and he's dead. Be done with it. But they don't do that. because there was no body. And that still poses an enormous problem for historians. See, the Jewish leaders, they knew there was no body. That's why in our reading this morning, they made up a story. They gave a large sum of money to the guards and said, lie about it, say that the disciples stole the body while you were asleep, and if trouble comes back to Pilate, we'll take care of Pilate for you. Just take the money and enjoy it. Now, please understand, you got to read between the lines here a little bit, but the priests knew the tomb was empty. These priests were not easily parted with their money. They loved their money. And they were not going to hand over a large sum of money to these guards until they actually went out or had somebody go out and verify that the tomb was actually empty. These guys knew before they ever forked over that money that the tomb was empty. Well, that brings us to the most popular theory. The third theory is, well, somebody stole the body. That's why the tomb was empty. Okay, well, who? We have three possibilities: the Romans, the Jews, or the disciples. So let's just take them in order. How about the Romans? Could the Romans have stolen the body? Sure. Let me ask you this. Did the Romans want Jesus dead or alive? They wanted him dead. Okay. What would it mean for the Romans to take the body and then hide it and make it seem like Jesus was risen? Well, that would mean that this Jesus Messiah thing would continue to go on and there would continue to be upheaval in the city. Does that sound like something Pilate would want? Of course not. The Romans didn't take the body. Well, maybe the Jews did. So I ask you the same question. Did the Jews want Jesus dead or alive? Of course they wanted him dead. They're the ones who pushed the Romans to crucify him. They backed Pilate into a corner. Why would they steal the body in order to keep the Jesus movement alive? They wouldn't. Well, of course, that leaves us with the only possible explanation, the disciples. The disciples, just as the priest said, they came and they took the body and made it look like there was an empty tomb. But does that make sense? Does that seem to fit the evidence for you? I mean, look at it carefully. Assuming that the disciples, a bunch of fishermen and tax collectors, could get by the Roman guards and take the body, they would know for a fact that the body was dead. I mean, they had a stiff. And they'd have to do something with that stiff. What's there to do? I mean, maybe they went out in the desert and buried it in a shallow grave. Okay. But the truth is here. Every single one of those men and women would know. Jesus didn't rise. So as they're going around town pretending like Jesus is risen and spreading lies, how long do you think they could keep that up without it all unraveling? And they were risking their own lives to do it. Who would do that for a lie? Chuck Colson, he's one of the guys who went to prison because of his part in the Watergate affair that caused President Nixon to resign. That Chuck Colson said this, quote, "I know the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me. How? Because 12 men testified they had seen Jesus raised from the dead and then proclaimed that truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Every one of them was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't keep alive for 3 weeks. You're telling me that 12 apostles could keep that lie for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. Okay, 4. Others have insisted that the tomb wasn't actually empty on Sunday at all. The body was still there. It's just that the women and then the disciples went to the wrong tomb on Sunday morning. Yeah, it makes sense, right? They go to the wrong tomb and it's empty, and so they run back to Peter and John, and they run out to the tomb and they see that it's empty. Actually, that's an easy enough problem to solve. Again, you have to ask, where's the body? If these guys run into town and they're yelling around everywhere that Jesus is risen, it's really easy to quell that. The authorities can just take them back out to the graveyard, open up the tomb, and say, there's your Jesus, he's dead. His body's torn up, he's swelling, he's starting to rot. Of course, it doesn't make any sense. Now, my favorite theory is a newer theory. It's only been out for about 20 years. It's called the twin theory. It comes from a historian by the name of Dr. Robert Gregg Cavan. He holds a PhD from UC Irvine. Cavan's hypothesis is that Jesus had a twin Why are you laughing? It's serious. This is a 400-page academic paper. Jesus had a twin, and the two of them were separated at birth. When Jesus died on Friday, his twin just happened into town on Sunday. He heard the news, and he claimed to be the risen Jesus. Now, that makes perfect sense after you hear what happened to your brother, that you would time him. That sounds a little sketchy. Like, you want to put yourself in that place. And I know when you hear that, you think I'm making up fringe philosophers out there way out. No, this guy presented a 400-page academic paper, which he presented at a conference claiming Jesus had a twin, and that's the explanation for the empty tomb. Why? Because he knows Jesus was dead, and he knows the tomb was empty. And he's grasping at straws to try to explain it, because none of the other theories hold any water, so he comes up with this. Now, I submit to you that no explanation fits the evidence better. Notice my words. Fits the evidence better than the one given to you by the eyewitnesses who recorded in the Bible. The explanation given by the disciples who went from hiding in the dark, scared out of their minds with complete despair and hopelessness filling their hearts, from that to boldly proclaiming the truth of a resurrected Jesus on the streets of Jerusalem, and not caring one whit about the consequences against them. When they were threatened with death, they didn't care. They continued to preach. And when they start seeing their brothers and sisters put to death for saying the story about the resurrected Jesus, they continue to preach it, sometimes with renewed zeal. Now, something transformed these frightened disciples, some of whom initially denied that Jesus was actually the Christ, just to save their necks. Remember, Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and now he's out on the streets proclaiming him. What would change these men so radically, so thoroughly? Jesus' own brother, who while Jesus was alive before the crucifixion, denied that Jesus was the Lord. And then after the crucifixion, starts proclaiming him as the risen Christ. And a large number of priests, the very people who pushed Jesus to the Romans to be crucified. Acts tells us that a large number of those priests got saved. What explains that? Well, only one answer seems reasonable. It's what Peter said on the streets of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 2. Peter said, "This Jesus, God raised up, and of that we all are eyewitnesses." And if Jesus is risen, then he is the Son of God. That's what Romans chapter 1 verse 4 says. It says, "He was declared to be the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead." The resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead declares that Jesus is in fact the Son of God. And as the Son of God, that transaction between him and the Father, where he exchanged his righteousness for our sinfulness and our sins, that transaction stands, and we've been forgiven. The slate's been wiped clean. Our sins were paid for by that sacrifice on the cross. And that's yours if you'll just trust him. Have you? Will you? I know there are voices whispering in your ear saying, "It's just naive, that's silly, that's dumb, that's naive to believe that." So I invite you, go ahead, go home and weigh the evidence, do the research yourself, ask the difficult questions. Remember, though, the biblical faith is not simply agreeing with facts. It's not just giving mental assent. It's not just accepting a logical argument about Jesus. I've tried to present a logical argument for the resurrection here this morning. No, biblical faith, saving faith, true faith in the human heart always leads to conversion. And conversion leads to action. It's a willingness to act because you're convinced of the truth, right? You trust the plane, so you get on it and you fly. You trust the surgeon, so you submit yourself under his knife You trust the bank, so you put your money there. You trust Jesus for salvation, so what? Well, so you live like it. Your trust leads to action, always, in every facet of life. Your trust leads to action. Now, if you say that Jesus rose from the dead, then that means that Jesus is alive. And Jesus isn't just a happy thought to help you through your hard times. No, he's not just some nebulous force out there in the universe influencing people. No, he is actually a living, personal Savior. And he wants an intimate relationship with you. Think about that. The cross couldn't hold him, it stands empty. The tomb couldn't hold him, it stands empty. Because Jesus is alive and he is Lord. Now, I have a warning for you. Please do not take the words that I've spoken this morning too seriously. Okay? It's probably safer if you just think about these things once or twice at the most each year. You know, maybe Easter and Christmas. You know, it'd probably be better that you don't talk about these things openly or that you believe them too deeply. Certainly you don't want to believe these things as deeply as these people who were there as eyewitnesses that morning. Don't do that. Please don't do that, because it will absolutely turn your life upside down. It will change you so radically and affect every decision so drastically that you'll never get your life back. You'll have to give it to him. Let's pray. Father, we realize our lives are not our own. You made us. We belong to you. Draw us to yourself. Those of us who know you, draw us into the joy of the empty tomb today. That today would be more than bunnies and eggs and ham, but that it would be a real party, a real celebration around the empty tomb as brothers and sisters. And for those who don't know you, Father, I pray that you would give them the gift of faith, open their eyes and let them see the truth. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.